I want to give a shout out to Visionary number 1 who went by Blinded Visions. He's now going by Visionary number 1. I love this brand, but this is a very new brand, I think. You guys may not know him because brand new, but I wouldn't be shouting him out if I didn't believe in him. If I sound sick, it's because I am. I am sick. But that does not stop me from shouting this guy out. And also, if you want to get to know a little bit about the creator, he's making music, he's going to launch a YouTube channel, and he's going to be posting raw behind the scenes content for his viewers, his followers, and all sorts of stuff. I believe in him, so I figured I'd shout him out on the channel, get some of you guys to put your sights over there in case that is something you like. I believe in him. He made some good stuff, so I can't wait to see what else he creates, what more he comes out with. I hope one day he makes a drop, because that would be one hell of a milestone. So, congrats to you, buddy. Keep it going. Alright, anyway, let's get right back to the video. The holidays. A time of warmth, of strings of lights, of laughter, of families gathered together. Yet beneath that facade of cheer, there are stories that shatter the illusion. Moments when celebration gives way to tragedy, when joy turns to silence. Tonight, we turn our attention to one such story, a case that unfolded on Christmas Eve and remains unresolved to this day. The Sodder children of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a family's nightmare on the eve of Christmas. It is a story of fire and fear, of unanswered questions, of a missing children's album that never closed. But first, before we dive into the specifics, let's set the stage. Why do some of the most haunting deaths or disappearances occur around the holidays? Why do we feel them so acutely in December? There are several intersecting threads. Isolation. Many people travel or host guests or stay somewhere unfamiliar. Routines shift. Safety nets may be weaker. Stress and expectation. The holidays bring emotional weight, expectations of joy, generosity, togetherness, which can amplify old wounds or introduce new vulnerabilities. Symbolic timing. A perpetrator might choose a holiday moment for maximum impact. When vigilance is low, when people imagine everything is okay, a crime on the eve of Christmas feels especially wrong. So, when a tragedy occurs in December, it clashes violently with the narrative of peace and goodwill. That tension, the contrast, is what makes these cases linger in our minds. In this talk, we will examine one case in depth, the Sodder children disappearing, and then reflect on the broader patterns, what holiday timing adds to a crime, how investigation can be complicated, and how those left behind live with the date forever changed. Our story begins on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945, outside Fayetteville, West Virginia. The family of George Sodder and Jenny Sodder lived in a two-story timber frame house about 2 miles north of town. They were immigrants from Italy, settled in the region, raising 10 children. The children spanned ages Marion, 19, John, 22, George Jr., 16, Sylvia, 3, and the 5 younger children. Maurice, 14, Martha Lee, 12, Louise 10, Jenny Irene 8, and Betty 5, who would play the central role in what followed. That evening, the family celebrated. The older children had been working, younger ones stayed up past their usual bedtime thanks to new Christmas toys. But before the fire, there was a moment. A warning that today feels impossible to ignore. A stranger came to the Sodder home, a woman selling life insurance. When George refused, her tone shifted. She told him, "Your house will go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." She mentioned his political views, and then walked away. At the time, it seemed like empty intimidation. After Christmas Eve, it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a promise. Hours before the flames rose, Jenny Sodder heard something. A dull, heavy thud landing on the roof. Not a storm branch, not an animal, something thrown. She didn't know it then, but another man would later come forward, a bus driver who said he saw someone standing near the Sodder home that night, throwing objects toward the house. Maybe a prank, maybe something far worse. A spark meant to ignite a Christmas Eve tragedy. A driver on nearby Highway 21 reported something else. As he passed the road leading to the Sodder home, he saw a car parked awkwardly at the intersection. A man inside, watching the flames rise, then sped away. It adds another puzzle piece. Someone was out there, watching the fire. Someone who didn't try to help. Not long after, another man appeared at the Sodder home. He pointed to the fuse box outside and said, almost casually, "This will cause a fire someday." The Sodders found the moment unsettling, especially because a phone company worker later confirmed the wiring was completely safe. These weren't coincidences. They were warnings. But for what? The scene? Normal holiday bustle. At about 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang. George, barefoot, attempted to climb the outside wall, broke a window, opening his arm in the attempt. He realized the ladder they usually used was missing. A water barrel that would normally help fight fire was frozen solid. His business trucks refused to start despite working fine earlier that day. Just hours after the fire, another witness stepped forward. He said he'd been driving past the Sodder property late that night and saw a group of men. Not running, not panicking, but calmly taking a block and tackle from the Sodders' equipment. This was the same device used to lift heavy engines, the same tool George relied on. If true, it suggests something unsettling, that someone had been disabling the family's only vehicles, even as the fire was about to begin. The house burned. The fire department, hampered by wartime shortages, delayed. By dawn, ashes remained. George and Jenny assumed the 5 younger children had perished. The state issued death certificates on December 30th, listing cause of death as fire or suffocation. At the coroner's inquest, a strange testimony appeared. A woman, whose identity was barely checked. She claimed she'd stood by the road and watched the Sodder children burning in the fire. No one at the scene saw her. No neighbor recognized her. Yet, her words were accepted without question. It was as if the officials needed someone to declare the case closed. even if her story didn't make sense. But the Sodders didn't accept that conclusion. They found irregularities. No substantial bone fragments were found by firefighters despite the intense blaze. The latter was missing. There were witnesses who claimed to have seen a vehicle near the house late that night, throwing balls of fire. When the telephone company arrived days later, the worker made a discovery the fire couldn't explain. The Sodder phone line hadn't melted. It hadn't burned. It had been cut, cleanly, deliberately, 14 feet above the ground. Someone had climbed up in the darkness on Christmas Eve to sever the only way the family could call for help. They erected a billboard along U.S. Route 60 with photos of the missing children and offered reward for information. Their belief? The children were abducted, not killed in the fire. During these excavations, the family also reported finding a small enamel box containing teeth. George Sodder believed these might have belonged to one of his missing children. Experts, however, could not verify them. It was another piece of a puzzle that refused to make sense. Evidence that should have confirmed the fire's tragic conclusion only deepened the mystery. A later forensic specialist contradicted that explanation entirely. Even in crematoriums. Even in crematoriums, controlled chambers reaching temperatures far hotter than a house fire. Bones do not vanish. They calcify. They fragment, but they remain. Yet inside the Sodder home, nothing. No skull, no rib fragments, no teeth. Just a question. Where were the bodies? Some believe the children were taken, not killed, and smuggled out of the country. George Sodder had strong political opinions against Mussolini, and he clashed. He had clashed with men in town who supported the dictator. Rumors spread that the fire was retaliation, and that the children had been taken overseas. No proof ever surfaced, yet the theory refuses to die. In the weeks that followed, reported sightings came in. One woman claimed she saw 4 of the Sodder children at the tourist stop in Charleston the morning after the fire. The kids were with 2 adults who refused to speak to her. She remembered something else. When she tried to engage the children, one of the adults shot her a look that said, "Stay out of it." A look sharp enough to keep her silent for decades. The Sodders hired a private investigator to track the photo. He promised updates, and it vanished himself. He stopped answering letters, calls, everything. It's unclear whether he ran off with their money or found something that made him stop talking. Either explanation feels wrong. Over years, the family evacuated the site in 1949. Found small bone fragments determined to be a single person aged 16 to 22, and showing no signs of exposure to flame. Improbable if the children died in the fire. Later, the Smithsonian Institution examined the remains and concluded the bones belonged to a child, older than any of the missing Sodder children. Once again, evidence seemed to rule out the fire as their end. Decades later in 2007, bones were found near the property during a renovation. For a moment, it looked like the case might finally break open, but analysis confirmed what the family feared. The bones did not belong to the Sodder children. A final rumor haunts the story, whispered but never confirmed. Locals claim that someone at the funeral home warned the Sodders not to open the caskets where the two bodies recovered from the fire. The implication was simple and chilling. What if the remains inside weren't their children after all? The FBI briefly investigated for possible interstate kidnapping, but closed the case after 2 years. The state closed the case in 1950, deeming it hopeless. To this day, the fate of Maurice, Martha Lee, Louise, Jenny Irene, and Betty is unknown. The mystery lives on. Let's examine some key elements that make this case emblematic of holiday season disappearance and tragedy. Timing and context. Christmas Eve, a time when families gather, emotions run high, routines shift. A house fire at that moment is doubly devastating. Location and vulnerability. A remote-ish home, winter cold, water barrel frozen solid, ladder missing, trucks not working, a perfect storm of obstacles. Investigation complications. Wartime manpower shortages, delayed response, initial fire marshal conclusion of accidental fire with bodies cremated completely, despite evidence challenging that. The missing phone line, it hadn't burned, but cut. Emotional and symbolic weight. For the Sodder family and for the local community, Christmas would forever carry the shadow of what happened. The missing children became part of the holiday mythos. Unresolved question. Were the children killed in the fire? Were they kidnapped? Why were regular safety tools unavailable? Why did the phone line appear cut? These unanswered questions breed speculation and keep the story alive. Decades later, George and Jenny Sodder received a letter, postmarketed from Kentucky, no return address, containing a photograph of a young man. The image appeared to show Louise, one of the missing children, now grown. On the back, a cryptic message read, Louise Sodder, I love brother Frankie, A90132. The family believed it might be him, but the identity was never confirmed. It was a fleeting, haunting clue, a glimpse of hope or a cruel mystery. The case also invites reflection. When a tragedy occurs in the holiday season, the fear, the loss, and the rupture of expectation become deeper. In the Sodder case, a home that should have been safe during a celebration became a scene of haunting uncertainty. This case embodies our theme of mysterious deaths around the holiday, because it happened on Christmas Eve, a time we associate with light and family. It involves disappearance in a fire, a layering of tragic elements. It remains unresolved. The lack of closure adds to the horror. And it shows how a holiday environment can amplify vulnerability. Frozen water, absent ladder, delayed help. Having examined the Sodder case, let's step back and see what patterns emerge. Patterns that can help us understand why holiday season tragedies like this still disturb us so deeply. Pattern A. Timing and disruption of routine. The holidays often bring changes. People travel, houses sit empty, safety practices lapse. Criminal or tragic events during these shifts can exploit the gaps. Pattern B. Isolation and unusual locations. In our case, the Sodder house was somewhat isolated, and winter conditions compounded the delay in help. Many holiday season disappearances or deaths occur in cabins, holiday homes, and remote towns. The expectation of safety gives a false sense of security. Pattern C. Symbolic resonance. A night meant for family and joy becomes a night of loss. That resonance makes the story linger. The tragic event becomes more than the event. It becomes lore. Pattern D. Investigative challenges. Holidays involve staff shortages, travel complications, weather issues, fewer witnesses perhaps. In the Sodder case, delayed fire response, frozen equipment, missing ladder, possibly sabotage. These factors can hamper resolution. Pattern E. Impact on survivors and community. For the Sodder family, every December carried the weight of the missing children. Holidays don't return to normal. They bear the scar. That emotional after effect is part of the tragedy. The holidays may promise light, but they do not guarantee safety. In fact, the very shifts that make the season special, travel, guests, cold, routines broken, can introduce risk. For audiences, the story of the Sodder children is an invitation to lean into the dark side of the holiday narrative, to question the idea that nothing bad happened then. Before we close, let me leave you with one final thought. On that Christmas Eve in 1945, the lights were on, the toys were new, the children were excited, and yet, something went horribly wrong. The ladder was missing, the phone line cut, the water frozen, the children vanished. If ever there was a winter's tale of mystery, this is it. Thank you for joining me tonight. If this story moved you, please share it, reflect on it. Remember that safety is not automatic. The holidays are precious, but they're also fragile. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and may the light of memory outshine the darkest night.